Nice to see you all. Today we're having a way-seeking mind talk. So the way this works is if people have received the precepts, which is publicly vowing that you will try and have beneficial, wholesome thoughts, beneficial and wholesome speech, and beneficial and wholesome actions to the best of your ability for the rest of your life. So that's the vow that people take. And one of the consequences of doing that publicly is that you give a talk about what brought you to Buddhism and what gets you to be here where you are now. So today, Jamal Taisen, previously known as Jamal, is going to share a little bit about his story. So I'll move it across to you.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for being here. If you want to head for the exits, please do so now, before I start, then I won't get interrupted. As Nettie said, my name is Jamal Taisen. I have recently undertaken Jukai and taken on the precepts. I'm going to do this talk Theravadan style. There's a slight difference in how they do talks in Theravadan Buddhism, where you just don't prepare anything. I've got no notes, I haven't thought about it, I'm just going to speak. So we'll see how that goes, and again, the exits are there. Think about how I came to Zen, how I came to the practice. I think, we are all a result of...
Oh,
yes.
I haven't put on record.
You haven't put on record? Okay.
Oh, wait a minute. Yes, I have.
You have?
Yes, I have.
We have. All right.
Just wanted to make sure.
Very good. We are all a result of our past and things that we have no control over. And I think part of my journey into Buddhism started before I was even born. I'm the child of Anglo-Australian mother and a Chinese-Malaysian father, and the kind of Chinese-Malaysian that worships money more than Buddhism, but that's okay. You have the altars in my traditional family village has Kuan Yin and the Buddhist gods and all that, but then also, you definitely put your little paper money there to make sure more of it comes back around. But my parents met when they were at university and quite young, and in the early 90s, and they had me. We moved to Malaysia for a little bit, and I had a bit of that kind of Asian style upbringing for a few years, but then they split up quite early on in my life. I was about 3 years old. And then when they split up, they very much split up. They didn't really see each other. They couldn't. My father didn't know where we lived, could no longer kind of have any contact with us in any kind of way, and so he decided to deal with the suffering of that by going to become a monk. So he went back to Malaysia and he found a teacher there, and then made his way through to Burma, and was a monk for 3 years in the Theravadan tradition in Burma. I'm a baby at this time, I don't know anything about this, but that's all going on in the background. And through that he meets other monks like Ajahn Brahm and a few different teachers and that kind of thing in Thailand and Southeast Asia. And eventually he comes back. And by this time when he comes back, I'm about 7 years old. He finds us again, we have some level of contact. But by this time I've had a little bit of a difficult upbringing. I've had a lot of things happen, and a lot of the suffering of others passed on, in a lot of ways in which I had to deal with. And I was a child, I didn't really know much. But then suddenly in my life, there's this man who seems familiar and not familiar, and he's got this Buddhism thing going on. Now at the time when I'm young, I'm a good child, I listen to my mother, so everything he does is terrible. Everything he does is bad. So this Buddhism thing is bad because he does it. So I kind of don't really think much about it, and I kind of go, yeah, whatever. And he's every so often trying to teach me Buddhism stuff, but I'm like, no, it's your weird little Buddhism thing. I don't want anything to do with that. But there are little seeds that get planted. He plays Ajahn Brahm tapes back in you got tape recorders. He's playing the tapes as we go to sleep and things like that. And, go to his place and it feels different. There's not a lot of stuff there. There's, these statues and things, but, there's a different kind of vibe to it all, which I think has an impact. It builds in your mind a little bit. And I go on, and I'm a teenager, and I become, I think as a lot of teenagers of my generation become, a really hardline atheist. Like Richard Dawkins had nothing on me kind of level of things. I was very, no, there is only, physical materialism and that's it, nothing else, and all of that. And that's very much kind of how I'm approaching the world, but I'm also suffering. I'm also have a lot of things I'm dealing with, a lot of traumas and things, and I develop a way of dealing with that that's very self-focused, become very obsessed with things that I do. I'm quite, at the time I'm quite talented musically and whatever else, and I just go, yeah, that's my whole thing, and I get a lot of praise for that and a lot of external validation, so I lean into that. But the seeds of discontent are sitting there. I get into philosophy. I was always very kind of intellectual as a kid. I spent a bit of time in hospital when I was in my teenage years. And I remember one time I spent a 3-month period in hospital and I was very bored. Hospital's got nothing to do. I watched the film 10 Things I Hate About You like 15 times. It's really bad. I can't do it anymore. But what do I decide to do with those 3 months? I decide to read through the entirety of the Socratic dialogues and Plato and Aristotle. And I'm just like completely immersing myself in philosophy and thinking and that very kind of cognitive way of thinking about things. That's how I learned to be okay in the world, how I learned to make sense of the world. So there's this kind of hardline atheism, but also a real, kind of questioning, a real kind of sense of trying to ask all these questions. My mother who raised me, she was not particularly religious. She was raised Catholic, but, like a lot of people of her generation, had a lot of issues and falling out with the Catholic Church. And she became a kind of, you got Christmas and Easter Christians, she became a solstice pagan. So, one of those people who kind of adopted that as a bit of a tradition, a way to have more kind of ritual and things, but I'm not sure how much belief was actually there, but it became a thing. And so there was some ritual in my household growing up, but it wasn't particularly spiritual. So here I am as this late teenager, into philosophy, obsessed with myself and trying to find ways to make people like me and show them how good I am, suffering like nothing else, and with just this little echo of Buddhism off to the side. And things really shift for me though when I'm 19 years old and I've gone off to university and gone to do a music theatre course and done all these, follow these things that I think I'm good at and it's going to get me a lot of validation. And then I get really bored. I get really kind of, I don't want to do that anymore. So I'm trying to work out what to do. And, what does any 19-year-old do who doesn't know what to do? They go off backpacking to South America. So pack up my bag, take a year off, and I go to South America. And that whole trip just, as it will do when you're 19 years old, it will just break you apart. It will just take everything you thought you knew about yourself and tear it into, and then I'm not sure I found any answers on that trip, but I had the space open up to find answers. I had experiences off in the mountains in the Andes and, down rivers in the Amazon and, things. I ran into a shaman in the center of the town square in Cusco, and, because I was working in the bar and everyone, the hippie looking guy, and everyone thought I knew where to find drugs. They asked me if I knew where to get ayahuasca, and I said, oh, maybe that shaman guy knows. So I took my friends to the shaman, and then he was like, yeah, I'm a shaman. I can, I can I can do this for you. But he wanted to interview everybody, and he said, eventually he rejected my friends because he was like, you're just trying to get high. I don't want to do anything for you. And he said, but you, if you want to come and do an ayahuasca ceremony, I'll take you for an ayahuasca ceremony. And I was like, okay, I guess, why not? Had all these different things happen that just changed how my brain approached things. It opened up a different kind of world to me, an understanding of spirituality, of things that were not as I thought they were. I certainly didn't come back from that trip a Buddhist, but I did come back from that trip no longer an atheist. I had let that go. And so then come back, and I'm at university studying things, and of course I'm studying philosophy, because what else would I be doing? I don't know if anyone's ever done first year philosophy, but they have this, or undergraduate philosophy really, but they have this thing where they give you do like a semester on a type of philosophy, like ancient Greeks or the German idealists or the existentialists. And then at the end you have to write an essay, like your final essay is always, which one of these things that we've spoken about most speaks to you, and can you kind of talk about it and cite and reference it, but also kind of justify your position. And I found for maybe 4 years in a row, I kept picking, okay, I like the Stoics, I like Sartre, I like Nietzsche. I kept picking something, writing about it, and then about 6 months later, realizing that that was pretty much exactly what the Buddhists were saying the whole time. And it kept happening. It was this intellectual thing where I kept landing on a position that I went, okay, this is how I think the world is. This is what I think philosophically, intellectually. And then it was, oh, and by the way, Buddhism also thinks that too. Around the same time, I had a friend who kind of cajoled me into going on a Goenka Vipassana retreat. It's one of those 10-day long intensive meditation things, which is a lot. But, after about 7 days of sitting for 12 hours a day, often something breaks open, something changes, and suddenly I kind of get meditation in a different way. I understand it in a different way. I kind of go, oh, this is what my dad was talking about the whole time. This is why he likes it. And so I came back from that having suddenly developed a desire for a meditative practice. And so all these little things, these little pieces keep stacking up. They keep coming brick by brick. And, I'm still at the time, not sure. I'm interested, but, I've got all this wave that is building, and I think eventually I go on a trip to Cambodia, and I'm just traveling around Angkor Wat and all the Cambodian places, and I remember walking around and feeling a profound sense of comfort, not only in the kind of historical places, but in the little monasteries I found, the little monastic areas, just kind of feeling at home in those places. And I turn to myself and I go, well, you believe in the philosophy. You think the way that they think about the world is right. You like meditation. And you've gotten a lot of benefit out of that. And you feel really comfortable in these settings. Probably time to just call yourself a Buddhist, mate. And so I kind of go, okay, I'm a Buddhist. And I don't even remember if I did anything. I might have done a little kind of 3 refuges chant to myself in one of the temples or something. But I just kind of went, all right, I'm a Buddhist. That's what it is. And again, not much changed when I decided to do that. That was just it's kind of the natural flow of things. That was where I was at. But putting a label on it, saying this is what I am, this is what I believe, it gravitates you slightly. You just start to go towards that a little bit more. And so, I end up talking to my dad about Buddhism more because he knows some things. I end up listening to talks online more. I start saying, it's probably okay to go to a monastery and spend a few days there and hang out. I might be all right to go on this meditation retreat and, see what that's like. And just start to step slowly and slowly further in. And this is where I think the kind of the habitual nature of who we are and where we come from falls in. I became a Theravadan Buddhist because that was the one that was familiar. That was, the Ajahn Brahm lineage that my dad was part of. By this time he'd come back to Australia and gone back to Perth for a little bit and been a caretaker at Ajahn Brahm's monastery for a bit and then come back here and all sorts of different things. And he, that was just what was there. That was easy. That was the community that he was part of. It made sense to join that. And so I did. I stepped into that and I started going on some retreats and started, attending monasteries and services and that kind of thing. When I travelled more, I found ways to tap into it. I spent a lovely month in a monastery in Sri Lanka and spent a very long time in Sri Lanka driving around just on a bit of a, listless backpacking trip there where I had a motorbike and I would just drive around, and then every day at about 10 o'clock I'd be like, oh, okay, it's almost Dharma time at the monastery, so just kind of find the nearest monastery and drop in and say hi and see what was going on. And throughout this whole time, I still had some of that suffering in me. I still had some of that tension, that self-obsession, that focus on, on who I was and how I could get validation and all that kind of those hindrances. And throughout this time, for a certain period of time, my life got a whole lot worse. I fell into some really bad habits. I started, I'd always had depression, but I started having quite serious depression. I started having some very negative mental health spirals. I started, making a lot of bad choices, doing a lot of things that made everything worse. And it was this interesting thing where, the Buddhism wave was building, but also the car crash of my life was also collapsing at the same time sometimes. And there was a point in my early 20s where everything fell apart. Everything really just fell apart for me, and I was bedridden and couldn't move and was completely and utterly spent. And that was a moment, I think, when I decided, amongst a few other things, to really step further into the Buddhist practice. It felt like a way out. It felt like a way that I could help myself find a path out of the woods. And it did. It helped. But I also stepped a bit further. And then once things got a little bit better, I went, okay, cool, this is fine now. Let's do it back. And I did that quite a few times. I think I had quite a number of years in my 20s where I had something happen, some problem come up, and I would step further in and then I'd step further out. And I'd step further in and then I'd step further out. But things did get better. Things did start to improve. I did kind of start to get my life back on track and build things in a way that made things feel more positive. And I kept inching closer and closer to Buddhism. Every time I travel, I'd go and try and find a retreat to go on, or try and find a monastery to visit, or try and do these kinds of things. And I would try and deepen my practice and deepen my meditative practice. And as a Theravada Buddhist, we have the 5 precepts for lay people, and I took the 5 precepts quite seriously for quite a number of years. Absolutely no alcohol, absolutely no lying, absolutely all these things. And I was very, very stern about that, because that's what I felt was the right way to go. And I remember at one point, this is maybe 5 or so years ago, I was dating someone at the time who was also a Buddhist, and we're hanging out, and she turns to me one day and says, you just take things too seriously, don't you? Just take all the Buddhism stuff way too seriously. And at first I'm a bit offended. I'm like, oh, what? What do you mean? You can't talk? And then I was like, no, actually, you're probably right. You're probably actually right. I probably am taking it too seriously. She was wise in some ways. She also said at another point, I think you'd really like Zen. And I was like, oh, whatever. But anyway. And so, I went through this phase of being very serious and very strict about all of the precepts and the teachings. And again, it was kind of the path I had chosen to get out of things. And so it was down the line, do it seriously, But, there was a lot of dedication, but not necessarily a whole lot of deep mindfulness and practice. It was there at times, but not outside of retreats, and not in a way that I felt, had an oomph to it. So I moved to Canberra about 7 years ago. Work, as everyone does. And when I moved here, I kind of, lost my kind of intrinsic connection to a lot of the Buddhist communities I knew in Melbourne. There's a few monasteries here and there and a few different groups, and I couldn't go to them anymore. And I tried going to one or two here, but the nearest ones I found were over all the way in Bundanoon, which is an hour and a half's drive away, which is a lovely drive, but not something for every week. And I just didn't quite find a group here when I first moved. It just didn't happen. And so I kind of just fell out of it a little bit. And I kept it up. I kept up the practice. But, I was in Canberra. Well, what do you do in Canberra? You become obsessed with work. And you just fixate on that because that's the one thing that matters in life. So I started doing that. And, there are benefits to that. I, managed to do a lot of things that have been really supportive for my life through that. But, the dissatisfaction had never really left. I'd managed to paper over it. I'd managed to find a way to make things okay. I'd managed to find, through my engagement with the Buddhist path, up until this point, I'd managed to find things to ease some of the suffering. It wasn't anywhere near as acute or bad as it had been. But, little flashes in the pan kept happening. Little things kept popping up. And there was always this rumble, this underlying little sense of dis-ease. I wasn't happy with life. I was fine with life. I wasn't miserable like I was, but I wasn't joyously happy. Of course there were moments, but I had all these things that I was supposed to have and all these things that were supposed to make you happy, and something was not right. Something didn't sit. And so we come to almost this time last year, and there's a little bit of another mini crisis, and more stuff's going on and happening, and I have a conversation with a friend of mine. It's a very good friend of mine who I should say I kept up the Buddhist practice in different ways, by the way, as during this time. So, I kept it up in ways of, I kind of let more back into more of the thinking and the talking about things. So I met a Christian minister through a mutual friend, and we got along very well. We had a lot of really great chats, and he wanted to know about Buddhism, and I wanted to know about Christianity, and, that evolved into, a community event and a podcast and all these different things. And so I had all these things that I was doing that were very Buddhist adjacent. But I wasn't meditating. I'd stopped meditating by that point regularly in any kind of way. And anyway, I had this little crisis last year, and I went to my friend and I said, it's just not working for me. The Buddhism thing, like at least the way I'm approaching it, it's not working for me. And he says, have you heard of Jesus? And I said, nice try. Nice try, but not quite. You got to work harder than that, friend. But he was very polite about it. But so we were talking about it, and it kind of landed on this thing where it's like I still believed in the core teachings. I still believed in the Dharma. I still believed in what the Buddha taught. All of that stuff in my worldview hadn't changed, but the practice wasn't sitting right. It wasn't giving me what I needed. It wasn't dealing with that dissatisfaction. And that dissatisfaction was building and building and building, and at various points popping up and leading to some pretty negative things. And so, I thought about it and went, okay, well, there are other types of Buddhism. Maybe I should think about that. If I still believe in the core teachings, but the practice isn't working, maybe there's a different practice off the same teachings that work. And so I looked around and, tried for the 17th time, searching Buddhism, meditation, Canberra, and for whatever reason I put a different word in there. Maybe I put the word Zen in there this time, or something happened, but Twining Vines popped up. I contacted Nettie, and we had a chat. Probably the first chat's more therapy than teaching, but anyway, that's what I needed at the time. And I started coming to temple, and I started arriving here. Actually, there's one more story I'll tell. Just after I started talking to Nettie last year, I was on a holiday in Europe, and I've got time for this story. This is a slight tangential story. I was on holiday in Europe playing this board game I play. Anyway, in this board game, I am colloquially known as the Jade Buddha. It's a long story, but there's a temple in Thailand with a big Jade Buddha in it, and it's a kind of peaceful kind of vibe I give or something. But on this holiday, I go to Assisi, which is in Italy, where St. Francis is from. And I'm a religious pluralist. I think that all religions are valid and true in their own way and have wisdom to it. So I'm in Assisi. So what am I doing in Assisi? I'm going to pray at the tomb of St. Francis, of course. That's what you do in Assisi. So I do that, and it's interesting. I have this profound experience where just I'm sitting there and I'm kind of meditatively praying. I'm not praying to God so much. I'm just meditating a bit, and then just suddenly this thing hits me. This thing about this kind of, I think the saying comes to my mind is that peace is the foundation of the house, and it's this thing of just this centering of peace in things. And it's like almost as soon as I turn my mind towards Zen, suddenly all these things just start clicking into place. All these different experiences happen and things just start to make a bit more sense. And so I come along here and I join this group, and at the start of this year there was a Jukai ceremony for a few people who were here. And I remember I was in Melbourne the week beforehand, and I was planning to go, but I was like, oh, maybe I'll stay in Melbourne the weekend. And I went, no, it's good. Come up for the Jukai ceremony. So I do. And I come up for it, and it's a lovely ceremony, and I see what it's all about. And I'm talking to Nettie the week afterwards, and I kind of I'm surprised at how low the barrier to entry is. In my head, ordaining is this thing that's you've got to you've got to be serious. You had to have passed 15 koans. You have to be a deep teacher. And it's you can just do it. You don't have to do anything. You just say you want to do it. And then he's like, yeah. I'm like, yeah, maybe I should do it. And so we decide to take it on, and I decide to take it on in the normal fashion. And then, as is wont to do in my life, another crisis happens this year, and this one's a fairly big one. But again, I think because I'm shifting how I'm thinking about things, because I'm shifting what I'm doing in my life, it's a big crisis. It's a big problem. There's a lot of stress and suffering with it. But I also quite quickly work out, hey, I think I just need a break. And so, I suddenly am making a very radical decision that I never would have really made before, where I go, you know what, I'm just going to take a year off. Take a sabbatical. Do some spiritual stuff. And so I remember visiting Nettie during that sabbatical, and I'm like, I've got to be in Australia until about August because I've got this pilgrimage I really want to do in Japan that I've heard about. And I'm not sure what to do, and I've got this time, and it's good for me to stick around and have this time, and I want to do the Jukai thing, and I'm an intense kind of guy. Can we fast track it? Is it possible to do it in this period of time? Because I got the time, and I'm kind of an all or nothing kind of person. So let's go all in. And we talk about it. It's yeah, we can do it. I've got to learn how to sew really quickly. And my robe has very uneven stitches and then much more even stitches once you get to the later parts that I've been doing. I've never sewn in my life before this. This was a learning curve. And here I am, and then a few weeks ago, suddenly I'm sitting in Lake George and doing the Jukai ceremony, and it's I don't know exactly the specifics of what has changed, but I know that something has changed, and I know that the kind of meandering, slow entry into Buddhism that I had has kind of led me to a point where the Dharma and the teachings, they hit different now. There's a feltness to them that I think I didn't have before. If I had before, I only touched and couldn't hold. And I don't know what happens next. Well, what happens next is on Tuesday I fly overseas and I go walking around an island for 2 months. But I don't know what happens after that. We'll see. But that's where I am, and that's how I got here. And thank you all for listening.
So would anyone like to comment or ask questions of Taisen? Thank you for a wonderful talk. Oh, we'll just plug this in. And I'll make it so we can see everybody. So
firstly, as someone who's sewed one of these, I resent you saying that the bar's set quite low. It took a lot of work for me to sew this. But more seriously, like you mentioned, the depression you suffered and the suffering you've had in your life. A big theme, and you mentioned your interaction with Ajahn Brahm, a big theme of his teaching is that you can't change your circumstances, but you can change your attitude to them. He says, if you're depressed, be happy being depressed. And is the title of the title in another language in America of his best-selling book, Opening Your Door to Your Heart. In America, it's called Who Ordered This Truckload of Dung, about how to deal with difficulties in your life. I'm just wondering I'm just sort of wondering, I guess you probably heard that, but it didn't really sink in, or is the impact it had on how you dealt with your suffering and depression?
Thanks, Tony. I was not happy being depressed. I thought I was special, and my depression was worse than everyone else's. You can't possibly be happy being depressed. No, maybe other people can be happy being depressed, but they have it easy. I've got it hard. I mean, I absolutely, I'd heard that, I mean, that's the first thing my father said to me when he found out I was depressed. He's like, oh, but he's got Ajahn Brahm says this, And there is a truth to that. And I think I took that on at various stages in different ways. I think I got better when I was depressed at managing things in a way of going, hey, this is just happening to me. My brain is doing this thing. I can't control it. And I just need to be okay with it. And I'm just going to be okay saying I need a break. I need to be taken care of. I need to, just take a step back for a little bit. So I got better at that. But I don't think I could never just flick a switch and just suddenly be happy being depressed. That I think that takes. He makes it sound so easy. Takes effort.
I'm just aware that we're running a little low on time because they have their meal over there soon. So maybe we've got time for one other comment or question. Oh, we've got Lynn.
Thank you so much for that wonderful talk, Tyson. And I'm very much looking forward to your trip to reading about it. And I was curious about how has, on a very personal level, how has your meditation practice changed from when you were practicing earlier to how you are practicing meditation as a Zen Buddhist now? What's the difference for you?
Thank you, Lynn. Ji-sen. I mean, I found that the teachings and the practice they come from the same place, but they're very different approaches to that same place. So in Theravada, it's much more instructional. It's, watch your breath in this way. And then you maybe start to do Vipassana meditation, and there's some very specific instructions about, notice sensations like this, body scan like this. And it's quite formalized. There's a specific set of meditative instructions that you follow, and you do this step and this step and this step, and then you hit first jhana and second jhana and third jhana, and it's like they've taken the path that the Buddha spoke about and kind of actually laid it out pavement by pavement for you. In Zen, I feel it's a little more personal. There's I mean, we come into the meditation hall, and people who come for the first time, well, there's no guided meditation. You just sit there, work it out yourself. You just do it. And so we kind of, the teacher-student thing, there's more of a personal way of working through that practice. And then obviously koan practice, which I've taken up, is very different. There's I think again, the koans to me feel like they're speaking to the same teaching, the same core Dharma, but it's very different to sit there with a koan and a riddle to try and get your mind around and feel your way through, and it's a different thing entirely. So I think one of the reasons I've stuck it out and did Jukai is because I feel like, for whatever reason, could just be personality, could just be anything, but that the Zen approach to teaching, the Zen approach to meditative practice just works with me better. It just clicks. I could do the Theravadan stuff, but it was often effortful. It was often, had to get 5 days into a meditation retreat to really kind of get anywhere with it. Whereas I think the Zen it more naturally suits my mind, more naturally suits how I approach things, and which is a wonderful thing to have found.
Can I just add one little thing? That maybe it's also just timing and when someone's ready, because it could have been exactly the other way around. You could have been sitting with us and it kind of was sort of working, but not kind of really working. And then you discovered Theravada and then, oh my God, this is just the right thing for me. So I think sometimes it's just where we're at a certain point in our life. And there's that fortunate moment when things click at the right time. And that's often, I think, what it just is. So I think we're very fortunate that it clicked. This clicked for you when it did, because now you're part of our Sangha. Thank you everyone for being here, and we'll just finish with one chant and then some 3 prostrations.
Beings are numberless. I vow to save them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless. I vow to enter them. Buddha's way is unsurpassable. I vow to become it.